just if you're not interacting with the group at that particular moment. If you want to turn your video on when you're talking, that's certainly fine. But they're trying to make sure that in the larger groups, and some of them have hundreds, we're not sending hundreds of video streams around. That's all. Since we are at the top of the hour, we'll go ahead and start the usual pleading for a note taker. And I warn you, I think we have allocated the first half an hour of the meeting to that. So if there is anybody who wants to kick us off by saying, no, I've broken my hand, or otherwise giving a really excellent excuse, that'd be great. Even better, of course, would be somebody saying, yes, please, I'll do it. Reverend Rtcweb has agreed to take notes on this meeting, so that's very kind of him. As I remind everybody, the only kind of notes we're taking for this are very simple. What did we decide? So there's definitely no need for he said, she said. We have recordings for that. And we do appreciate you taking this on. With that, Sean, shall we go ahead and go through the slides now?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, so this is Rtcweb at IETF 110. We are not in Prague, but since we're virtually in Prague, I think this is an echo back to our original BOF. As you folks will remember, the very first BOF for Rtcweb was in Prague. And here we are again, a resurrected working group, kind of not in Prague, kind of in Prague as well. Like then, we have a note well. This note well reminds you of the IETF policies which are in effect, especially on patent disclosure and codes of conduct. If you have not already read them, please do. Please feel free to consult a lawyer on exactly what they mean. If you have any concerns, you're also welcome to reach out as described here. Next slide. Your chairs are currently Ted Hardy and Sean Turner. We feel a little bit lonely, though. We always used to have 3 chairs and only dwindled to 2 at the very end of Rtcweb. Hopefully, we will not need to run this group for very long to resolve the question before us. But if you feel like adding yourself to the chair list, please reach out to an AD and see if the occasion strikes you. Next slide. Hold on just a second. I'm running a meeting right now. Oh. Bye. Hello. For those of you who just heard me say running a meeting right now. That's it. So our goal, and the only goal, is to address the contradictions regarding bundle only between bundle and JSEP. That is, what does M equal mean? It equals, maybe we'll see you in Prague. It equals, maybe we can work this out in a single meeting and relax again. Last slide, please. We already have a the virtual meeting tips, the note well, the note taker established. For Rtcweb, your chairs will just do that. If there's anything that you want put into the into the audio stream, you can preface it by mic, and one of the chairs will do that. There is no need for Blue Sheet because they are automatic now, and our status equals we're back.
So the only thing I think I'm going to add here, I guess, is for Harold. I think he is here.
We will just get on.
Is that he suggested on list that we look at a slipstreaming attack if we have time at the end. So I figured he sent slides. So I don't know if there's any objection to talking about that if we have time at the end, since we've got everybody roped in here.
If we have time at the end, I have taken a quick look at the slides. I don't think that they're entirely specific to Rtcweb, so we can certainly look at them, but I doubt that there will be an Rtcweb specific action item here, although obviously sharing them out to the community is a useful thing.
Okay.
Any objection? Okay, hearing none, let's go. Justin, Krister?
Okay. Ted, are you going to be sharing the slides? Perfect. All right, everyone. Welcome back to Rtcweb at IETF 110, otherwise known as just when we thought we were out, they pull us back. Okay, so we're here to talk about how do we align, JSON and bundle handling, and specifically for what we put in SDP offers and answers. The issue is that, unfortunately, late in the document process, we realized that JSON and bundle specify contradictory ways of generating, SDP offers and answers when we want to bundle, and there wasn't any easy way to basically reconcile late in the document stage like these diverging approaches. We also realized that the most common implementation, libweb_RTC, which is used in Chrome and elsewhere, actually has a behavior that differs from both of these specifications. And while its behavior is non-standard, there stands to reason that changing that behavior to match the specification may have it causes its own set of problems. So we figured we want to take a look at that at the same time that we're looking at how these two specifications diverge as to what the correct behavior should be. Next slide. All right, so a little recap for those of you who it's 4 a.m. This may be kind of gobbledygook, but this is just recapping, the notion of bundle policy, which is a thing that can be specified for JSAP to say, here's how you actually try to bundle in the outgoing offer. And these policies control exactly how aggressive the application is about attempting to, what happens if the other side can't do bundle. And these policies control at the lowest level ICE gathering behavior, which is then the thing that has the most direct consequence on what happens when the remote endpoint doesn't support bundle. When the default policy is the default policy of balanced, what ends up happening is that we always gather a unique set of candidates for the first M section of each media type. That means if you have an audio section and two video sections, the implementation will gather ICE candidates for that audio section, and it'll gather candidates for that first video section, but it's going to assume that that second video section is going to be bundled over that first, over the bundled transport and it won't gather candidates for that second video section. What that means then is if you're talking to an endpoint that doesn't support bundle, the expectation is that that second video session will not work. And the overall goal here is to kind of trade off the ability to interoperate with non-bundle endpoints with how many candidates actually need to be gathered, with the expectation that gathering more candidates for more M lines is going to just take longer in cost setup. So Balance gathers candidates for the first M section of each media type. Max Bundle, the most aggressive policy, only gathers candidates for the first M section of the entire SDP. And Max Compat, designed to be most compatible, gathers candidates for all M sections. And M sections that don't have candidates, for obvious reasons, can't be used with non-bundle endpoints because it presumes that these M sections are actually going to ride over the bundled M section, which will probably be like the first one in the SDP, in order to have their transport. Now, in JSEP and bundle, these M lines that do not have candidates are intended to be marked with a 0 port in those initial offers to ensure that that non-bundle endpoint on the other side, when it doesn't understand the bundle grouping, can simply just see that port equals 0 and reject those M sections with the expectation that that's an okay consequence, because you'll still, in the balance case, have that basic audio and video. It turns out that sometimes this works with non-bundle endpoints. They can see that even though well, I'll get to that in a second, but the fact they don't have candidates is not always an issue, because the remote side may generate their own candidates, and that may actually just turn out work because of pure reflexive candidates. But anyway, this is the intent of the bundle policies. Next slide. So here is just a representation in terms of SDP of what actually happens depending on the bundle policy. You can see in the balanced offer, we gather a port that ends up being unique ports, unique ICE candidates. I haven't included all the ICE candidates just for fitting this all on the slide, but both the audio and the video section have ICE candidates and unique ports. In the balanced offer, in the max bundle offer, only the audio section has a unique port, and the other two are set to 0. And then finally, in the max compat offer, candidates are gathered, there's separate ICE credentials for each M section, and each one ends up with a non-0 port. So this is just kind of setting the foundation here, explaining how do these policies differ, and in which cases might you end up with 0 ports for balanced and max bundle. Next slide. Okay, now getting into the actual differences here. Port 0 identifies these M sections that require bundling. When I say require, that even though the implementation is going to try to bundle all the M sections, the ones that can't be negotiated unless you negotiate bundle are the ones that are marked with 0 port and no ICE credentials. The 0 port behavior, the key difference between JSON and bundle is that JSON says that you mark these things with 0 ports that are going to be requiring bundle to be negotiated, but bundle says that you should also mark these things with 0 ports in answers and in reoffers. So let's go to the next slide. We can see what this looks like in practice. Okay, so in a simple case where we have one audio stream and one video stream, and we're using the default policy of balance, both offers have ICE credentials and both offers have unique ports. But the bundle answer has a 0 port even after bundling has been negotiated, whereas the JSON answer does not. And so, the thing that should be noted here is just the use of the M equals video 0 port in the answer ends up being a different behavior, and implementations may respond to that differently than the M equals video with a port, with a shared port, which is what most implementations are seeing in answers right now. Next slide. So that was with max bundle policy. You get the same result when using the balance policy, the default here. You generate, a different offer than the previous slide, but both bundle and JSON generate the same SDP. They both mark that second M line with the 0 port and include the bundle only attribute, which is a way of saying that, hey, this port is set to 0, but we're not, this isn't a disabled M section. This is basically only expected to be used when you're negotiating the bundle framework. And in both cases, the offer generated is identical, but again, the answer is different in that the JSON answer uses that shared port for the second M section, whereas the bundle answer uses the 0 port in the answer just like it did in the offer and marks it with bundle only. Next slide. Okay, and then finally, here's what JSON does, in that offer versus what libWebRTC actually does. And this kind of gets at, the implementation concern. Here we are using max bundle. On the left, we have the JSON offer, which is just like it was in the previous slide. That second M section is marked with, the 0 port and bundle only. But when libWebRTC goes to do this, it'll fill in, port 9 rather than port 0. And the concern then becomes, okay, how endpoints that have been receiving 9, suddenly react when they start receiving 0? You'll see that libWebRTC does not fill in ICE credentials for that second M section, just like JSON does. It's just that difference in the port and the lack of a bundle only attribute. On the answers end up being identical. So there's no concern there. It's just really what happens in that initial offer. I see Eric.
Could you just restate what you said about the ICE credentials for libWebRTC?
That here, libWebRTC has basically offered, ICE credentials in the first M section, just like it does for, just like JSON, specifies. And in the second section, there's not meant to be ICE credentials. There's just there's no candidates, no ICE credentials, and you just get this port value of 9.
So I'm just got it. Thank you.
Colin.
So just ignoring the port 9 or 0 here for a second, I'll come back to that in a bit. The A equals bundle only seems like we need that so that it's valid for the answer to even come back with that we're doing bundle, right? Like I'm sort of concerned about the libWebRTC missing the A equals bundle only seems like a bug we need to fix. I guess is that a question? Or are you going to propose that we don't need to fix that?
So I'll get to that. Okay. If we had a time machine. Okay.
Yeah, I guess you can get to this when it comes up, Justin, but I have a very basic question, which is, why should we care at all about any of this? Which is that it's very easy enough to write a little JavaScript to change these numbers around, and so that if you're speaking to somebody, right, it's a 9 instead of a 0 or whatever, right? And people do much more complicated things in WebRTC. So whereas, and also I would say that I've never heard a developer complain about this. And boy, they complain about lots of other stuff, but I've never heard a complaint about this. You don't have to answer it right now, but I'd just like to understand.
Well, I'll take a little aside here, because I think that you get at really what is the fundamental problem here, which is, why do we care? Why should we do anything? Why are we here in the middle of the night for many folks, talking about this? And I think, ultimately, the question comes back to, if we change some of these things, are some applications just going to break, all of a sudden? And that will cause people to start complaining.
If we do that, then we'll get complaints.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'm not getting complaints now.
So basically, in order to bring these specs into agreement, we need to change something. And some things that we might change might cause us to have more tomatoes thrown at us, and some might cause less. And so the trick is to figure out which of these things should we change to kind of get to a place where the specs agree, and hopefully maybe the implementation agrees with the specs, and we don't get tomatoes thrown at us. So that's why we're here. And I'll get to the details of that in a minute. But Eric, I see you.
Yeah, I just want to echo, I think, what Justin said, which is like the one the really most unsatisfactory outcome for me is to have the specifications be confusing so that like no one else can ever implement this and get it right. And it's all just locked in like my head and Justin's head. So in 2050 we get defrosted to like try to fix that emergency problem. So that's the thing I really don't want. Other than that, like I'm open to a lot of things.
Well said. Okay. Well, let's move on. There's a lot of technical detail here. We can come back to this once you frame the problem too. Colin.
Here it's like, look, right. So the flip side of what you guys just said, for sure. I get that. Right. The flip side is right now, all like Zoom does it, WebEx does it, Microsoft, I would say based on timing, looks like they do it, though I don't know for sure, maybe Bernard confirmed, but it looks like most of our WebRTC goes through an extra level of SBC to get this sort of stuff cleaned up. And that adds latency to every single call for every single user. Like the WebRTC latency on Zoom and WebEx is noticeably higher than the non-WebRTC thing. And the reason why is because we have to feed it through a whole extra SBC. So I've been trying to convince everybody, go remove that. To do that, one of the things that needs to happen is this was one of the incompatibility points. And I've been telling people for years, like the WebRTC sec says, like you're going to be getting these bundle things that you have to deal with, and you better not crash when you have 0 port. And so people have been moving towards that and trying to get those things out, but that causes, real harm for hundreds of millions of users per day, right? So like, I think that there is a need for us to get this to the point where it achieves the backwards compatibility problems that we're trying to do, and try and get those people to sort those out and get rid of those SBCs for the interop stuff. That doesn't necessarily nail down one of these solutions versus the other or whatever, but I think that is, don't underestimate that, right? Like there's stuff that's hard to change and there's stuff that's easy to change. And, we've been telling people for however many years to go do something, and if we're going to yank the rug out from underneath of them on that, it's not going to really improve the credibility story of why we should all do WebRTC, right? And make it good.
So
Fair enough. I mean, the one thing that, go ahead.
I see Tim in queue, but I'd like to ask after Tim if we could go ahead and finish the slide deck before continuing the discussion.
Just before Tim starts, I just want to respond a little bit to that. That the main thing is we have one thing that we didn't have before, which is a lot of data that informs like how often is bundle being used, how often do we have non-bundle endpoints, and I'll get to that in a minute, which will hopefully inform this conversation. Tim.
We're going to come to my question, so I'll shut up now.
Okay. In that case, carrying on, I think we're on to the next slide. Okay, so this is basically a summary of the places where these specs and libWebRTC differ. It's sort of summarized in that second column of the behavior. JSEP uses for these endpoints that can only be used when bundle is negotiated. It'll use port 0 and A equals bundle only in the initial offers. In the answers, it will not use bundle only or 0 port. It'll use a shared port. The bundle spec says you need to use port 0 and A equals bundle only in all offers, and then even after bundle is negotiated, for all lines that are not the default bundle group, you have to then use port 0 and A equals bundle only in answers and subsequent offers. And in libWebRTC, like JSEP, only does this behavior in initial offers, but it uses port 9, which is just an implementation sort of artifact that when there are no ICE candidates, it simply fills in port 9 because that's what the spec says to do when you have no candidates. So it doesn't use that port 0. And so the JSON behavior, as it was designed, and we talked about it at length in various IETF meetings, was designed to make the safest behavior for offers to non-bundle endpoints. And the answer behavior, is what applications are already expecting. There is no port 0. Bundle has the same behavior for offers, but it has what I think could be argued as a more consistent syntax, is that in both offers and answers, lines that are intended to be only used with bundle are marked with port 0. And that's I think was the reason for the change in the bundle spec, which occurred I think in bundle revision 42 to use port 0 in answers. And then finally, libwebRTC has, we basically, this is the default behavior. We wouldn't be changing anything. And so there wouldn't be any risk to apps of changing anything, but we wouldn't have that same behavior that makes things better for non-bundle endpoints. And as I mentioned, offering port 9 with no candidates, it could be rejected with like ICE mismatch. It could fail, or it might just succeed because if the other side has its own candidates, then peer reflexive candidates will work or be generated and may just work. So, this is the dilemma that we face. If we go and change the initial offers to always use port 0, some existing WebRTC apps may choke on that. If we change the answers to have port 0, more WebRTC apps may choke on that. And if we don't change anything, then we may not have exactly the backward compatibility behavior that we had originally designed. All right, next slide. So, there are a bunch of things to consider here, but I think it's helpful to try to break this problem down into multiple pieces. The first question before us is, what should we put into answers? This sort of steps aside the whole implementation of the WebRTC question. And this really affects any mode. Basically, when we have M sessions that are bundled, do they get marked with port 0 or not? And then the second question is for just considering initial offers, from JSON endpoints. Since one of the popular existing implementation does not use port 0, should we start using port 0 in the case where it has explicitly said to do max bundle, not the default? And then what should we do when the implementation says it wants to use the default, the balance, and we have more than one audio or video stream, meaning that one thing should be marked with a 0 port. And the reason I've broken these two out is that we might choose for a different behavior for applications that are just using the default versus applications that have specifically said we want to try to bundle as aggressively as possible. With that, have basically said, hey, I think I know what I'm doing. Next slide. So the first issue, as I just sort of summarized, if we make a change to start including port 0 in answers, applications that are currently seeing like a shared port today may incorrectly see that port 0 and think, hey, this M line has been disabled. And the number may not be high, but just for an example, when we switched to require DTLS 1.2, we noted that already over 99% of sessions were using DTLS 1.2, and we said we're going to phase out support for DTLS 1.0. However, despite that, 99% usage of DTLS 1.2, we got a lot of tomatoes thrown at us, and we actually ended up having to go to a 18-month deprecation timeline. Harold can correct me if I'm wrong on the exact details, to actually wind down support for DTLS 1.0 and force support for 1.2. That there were a small but quite vocal and quite heavily used minority of applications that did not support, this behavior and or to support, DTLS 1.2, and by, starting to deprecate DTLS 1.0, we were basically saying we were going to break them, and they got quite upset with us. So trying to avoid, being in that same position again of throwing the switch and suddenly finding applications that have, added support for bundle, but maybe not entirely be broken by setting this port and the answer to 0. Next slide. Similarly, this is the case where we say, okay, if we're doing max bundle, and right now we're sending this port 9 for that second M section, and we start sending port 0 for that second M section, are there applications out there that are going to break? I think I've talked about this sort of at length, but are there gateways or other sort of things that are written independently that have never seen an offer come through, and the way that they would break would just be like accidentally ignoring that video M section instead of actually using it. Next slide. And again, that for 2A, we're talking about max bundle, so it affects even cases where we have one audio and one video. Now in 2B, since this is the balance policy, the default, the only time we get a 0 port is when we have more than one M section of a given type. Like in this example here, we've got 2 video sections, and that second video section is marked with port 0. Right now, applications are not seeing that, port 0. In fact, due to an implementation detail again within librtc, it never, it was for a long time presuming use of plan B. Here, where there's actually use of unified plan and a second video M section, it actually gives that video M section a unique port rather than port 9. And so switching from that to port 0 would be its own difference. Next slide. All right, so the data. What actually happens out in the real world? So the top table talks about what are the bundle policies in use. I will sort of caveat that all these statistics are only taken from the dev channel, which has a pretty broad footprint, but not quite the same footprint as production Chrome, which would be probably 20x more data points. But it's being used by real applications. This is not Canary. This is dev, which is being used by real people every day. And about 85% of people are using balanced, and 7% of people using max bundle and max compat, not adding to 100 due to rounding. And then finally, the second table shows how often is bundle actually negotiated. And this is actually pretty informative because it says, if you have more than one audio or video stream of each type, basically you have a 99.999% success rate of actually achieving bundle. And I didn't really believe these stats, so I went and dug into them a little more closely. There are literally, hundreds of thousands of cases where, people were using, more than one sort of audio or video stream of a given type, and single-digit ones of where the bundle was not negotiated, and audio or video was there's more than one stream of a given type. So one thing has to be sort of taken into account is that most applications right now are still using Plan B, and at least within Chrome, and in that case, there's never more than one stream of a M section of a given type. But even then, the bottom line is that bundle is being used extremely heavily, is an extremely successful specification. The question, the only place where we see bundle not used almost exclusively is in the case where there's just a single audio and video stream. Next slide. And I will be able to pull some more data for this, in a couple of weeks when these stats reach the production channel. So Colin, did you? Okay. Let me sort of summarize the observations here, and then I'll sort of take any questions.
Can you just say a little bit? I mean, given the Zoom number, how many samples are can you give a feel of how many samples that data represents?
Tens of millions, or millions, or tens of millions.
Okay, makes sense. Because that that surprises me, given the way that the major web conferencing applications do share when they're sharing screen and sharing video at the same time. That seems surprising that it's 99.9999, like really surprising. It means no one's using WebRTC for. It just doesn't match up. Anyway, I'd be interested to dig into that a little bit, because those numbers don't really match. They surprise me a lot.
Well, they're just using bundle, Colin. They're doing that. They're just using bundle. I just looked at the numbers here. That was basically taken from a total sample set of about 15 million usages.
Okay, super. Well, that sounds good. Thanks.
Sure. Tim.
Yeah, I think there are apps which will open two peer connections if they want to do what's effectively unbundled behavior. So I think that might be skewing your figures. Like, so they'll open two peer connections, one for video and one for screen share.
Sure, that's entirely possible. I mean,
I think
the key point.
Colin's point. Right, sorry.
Right. Thanks, Tim. So, I mean, what takeaway should we have here? I think the number one takeaway is that, bundle is extremely popular. And, I've double checked these stats, but they're basically essentially zero applications that are negotiating more than one audio video stream of a given type within a single peer connection and not using bundle. There are definitely applications that are doing this, that are negotiating more than one audio video stream of a given type, but they're using bundle. And as mentioned, I think it was about, there's a meaningful fraction, like 2% of applications that are either using more than one audio or video stream of a given type with unified plan. There's also a meaningful fraction of applications that are using max bundle, but the majority of applications are using, or the super majority of applications are using the balanced bundle policy. And overall, the key point is just that bundle is used extremely frequently, and only in the case where there's a single audio or video stream do we see that there's a bundle not negotiated. Even then, it's still 94% success rate. So the conclusions we can draw from this is that if we change this policy where we start sending port 0 in the answer when bundle is negotiated, like almost every WebRTC app is going to be affected by this, because these are all cases where bundle is being negotiated, and suddenly, port 0 is going to come back in the answer. And I think it's reasonable, based on historical sort of similar cases, that some of these, are going to see this port 0 and be surprised by it and break. So I think that's a high risk. The second thing of what should we do in max bundle?
Justin, can I ask you a clarifying question?
Sure.
How do you recall in bundle how you say I don't want this M line if you can't send if port 0 means I'm bundling?
I think you send port 0, but you don't include the A equals bundle only attribute. And in all these cases where I've talked about port 0, I've been sort of assuming that it's included with A equals bundle only.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, so we talked about issue 1, which is what to do in answers. Issue 2A is what to do in offers when we're doing max bundle. And so before I get into my conclusions here, the one thing I guess is worth noting is that I talked to folks at Firefox about what their experience was, because they actually had implemented the support for A equals bundle only in port 0 a couple years ago. And during that time, there were, they ran into exactly the types of issues that I was concerned about, that you know, some things would see port 0 and malfunction. In fact, you know, according to the bug that's linked here, Cisco Spark malfunctioned upon, you know, getting a port 0 in A equals bundle only. But it has been rolled out in Firefox for actually a couple of years now. And so that allows us to maybe say that the risk is bounded, that, you know, the applications did malfunction here when getting port 0 in the initial offer, but if it works with Firefox, which Firefox now is sending port 0 in offers but not answers today, that, you know, most applications probably are dealing with that okay. So still, you know, there are some applications that don't work with Firefox, and so there's definitely some risk of changing like the behavior either for max bundle or for balanced to go from using port 0 to using port 9, or sorry, go from using port 9 to port 0. Roman, it's you and Q.
Roman, we're not hearing you. Roman, I'm still not hearing you. Can you try again?
I heard Roman briefly.
Yes. Okay, sorry. Can you hear me, or I'm seeing the activity?
Yes.
Okay.
You're good.
So there are still a fair number of applications which only generate offers from the browser and expect an answer from some sort of SFU. So there is, like, out of the stats, the fact that answer is being there are no answers ever generated by browsers. So it might affect the policy as well. It might affect observations as well. So applications will be considerably more affected by how offers are generated versus by how answers can be affected by how offers are generated versus how answers are generated. Like a lot of conferencing apps just generate offers and never generate answers in the browser. Just wanted to.
Yes, but we still would want these answers eventually to be consistent with our specifications.
Yes,
and so, like, while it won't have the same immediate consequence, it still may have this same this consequence down the road. The other point I would just make is that the, you know, offers only affect the case where you're not, like, for a application that has a single audio and a single video stream, it will not see a port 0 in the offer because it only has a single audio and a single video, and it's not using max bundle. It'll be using that balance policy and won't see a port 0 in the offer. However, it will see port 0 in the answer because that once bundle has been negotiated, that video stream, you know, is going to be bundled onto the actual audio M section. And so even in that simple AV offer, the answer will now have port 0. So that's why I think there's a pretty significant risk, because pretty much every app out there, unless it's like just a single audio, you know, M section application or data channel, is going to see a different behavior in answers if we, you know, snap to the bundle specification. Okay, so let's move on to, one other point that was worth mentioning is that before we move on, just slide back on 2B, you know, changing the behavior for endpoints that have more than one audio or video stream of that given type. It will affect some apps. The risk is probably bounded, as we've seen with Firefox, but these apps are not talking to non-bundle endpoints. You know, 99.999% of them, as indicated by stats, are negotiating bundles successfully. So the whole benefit of using port 0 in the first place and A equals bundle only was there to, you know, improve the interoperability with non-bundle endpoints. But what we're seeing is that these apps that are doing more than one audio video stream are exclusively really, you know, talking to bundle aware endpoints. So that sort of may affect our appetite to make changes, because the upside of making this this change to use port 0, you know, may be somewhat limited. And like, There may be other reasons, but like just in terms of negotiating better interoperability, it's just is not borne out by the data. Tim.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether data channel may change those figures. Like I figure there are probably quite a lot of apps that negotiate at least one media stream and one data channel.
But that's fine, because a data channel basically is treated like its own media type. So if you have an audio, a video, and a data, then you don't have any port 0 in your initial offer, because those are all separate media types.
I meant from the point of view of the stats.
Sorry, I mean, I'm not sure what.
Well, the
stats,
the stats will be, so it looks like a thing that didn't do bundle, but it actually did, because the thing that was there, the extra thing that was there was a data channel. Would your stats collection have picked that up?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're saying that basically the only cases that we're concerned about here are cases where there's two audio or two or more audio or two or more video streams, and whether there's a data channel or not doesn't have any impact on that. Those are the only places where you'd actually see that with the balance policy, a port 0. I have the stats open in front of me in case we need to get into it more later. Anyway, moving on to the next line, or next slide. All right, so here's the sort of the money slide. Here's what I think we should do. And again, these are my opinion, but hopefully informed by the data and the data from the previous slide. Is that I think switching to use we should reconcile these specs. And so basically we can either move JSEP to match bundle or bundle to match JSEP. And I realize as a JSEP author, I have some skin in this game and perhaps some bias, but I still feel like the least risky behavior in terms of breakage to existing applications is to switch the bundle spec to use the JSEP behavior. The benefit of the bundle SDP behavior, seems to largely be, a cleaner syntax. And I feel like that, the risk of now changing this, what will be SDP that's sent to, pretty much every single user of WebRTC is really too high for us to do it at this point in time. This change was proposed, in fairness, but by Krister a couple years ago, and sort of did not receive full sort of evaluation at that point in time. But I think probably even at that point in time, the ship had already sailed in terms of the size of the WebRTC ecosystem at that point in time. So if we do this, we would say that while you may include A equals bundle only in offers in answers, but then no new code should basically generate port 0 and bundle only in answers. Colin.
So look, I live with this. I think this is a pretty pragmatic recommendation. I will also point out this sort of matches Firefox behavior, which we have an incredible amount of deployment experience to suggest that it works and isn't causing problems. So I think that's there. I would also say this that the max bundle thing. I think that's an interesting split, to split the max bundle a little bit separately apart in the behavior. And I would be very much in favor of it, if it helped a transition to get everybody into a consistent code base, to update the max bundle label to now be a max bundle, we really mean it this time, label, to use a new label. Like, that's exactly the type of pragmatic thing we should do to make it easy for applications to transition. So I got no problem with that type of idea. I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
Hey, so I think I'm pretty in favor of this. I think there's one piece I don't quite understand, which I want to just drill into. But I think, so far as I understand it, the argument for the bundle. I also am a JSON author, so I have the same skin in the game as Justin, perhaps. But or editor rather. As I understand it, the real argument for the current bundle behavior is really aesthetic. And in the context of STP, that doesn't carry much weight with me. And given that we have, have to choose between one or the other, the installed base seems like it ought to win in that case. I don't think I quite. So as I understand it, that what you're proposing, this 2A, although it doesn't have an A, the second bullet, is that is that we change. So we create a new thing called max bundle safe, and that would have the current specified behavior, and that max bundle would then maybe have non-predictable behavior depending on which browser you're in, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm saying. We have a few options what we could do here. We could just basically say the max bundle token, the behavior there is unspecified and implementation specific. And if you're using max bundle, you can keep your max bundle. Or we could document saying that max bundle essentially presumes that there will be no port 0, and it will just presume that bundle is being used from the very beginning, as if you had already done offer answer negotiation and bundle had been supported by that, because that's essentially what happens today with Novartis' max bundle.
This seems like a reasonable approach to me. Thanks for explaining that. Sure.
So I covered then, sort of what we might do with max bundle, and then adding a new token that would avoid sort of messing with people who already feel like they're getting specific max bundle behavior. But as we see that there's still cases, and since I don't have the stats yet on the intersection between how many people are using balanced in multiple M sections of a given type, so we don't know quite the amount of risk of what it means to change the balanced policy. But that being said, the fact that Firefox, is implementing the JSON behavior means that we should at least try. I did mention that there's limited upside for doing this, but in terms of just getting to a space where our implementations match our documents, it seems worthy to at least try and see if there's like a more of a set of people who would be affected this than we thought. Krister.
Yes, hello. I'd just like to point out that even though I'm the author of bundle, I'm actually okay with this the recommendation in bullet 1. I guess we could point out that actually, in case people wondering how could bundle and JSIP, specify different things. So actually, bundle and JSIP, they used to be aligned. That at some point there was actually a suggestion, it was not by me, but anyway, to actually change the bundle specification, and we did that. Unfortunately, that change never got implemented in JSOP, so that's how we ended up with this misalignment. So just a little bit of history, but I'm actually fine to do this change bundle as suggested here in bullet 1. When we come to bullet 2, I agree this is an pragmatic approach. I think we can in JSIP we can change the name of the current max bundle. I suggest to do must bundle, but I mean it could be anything, and then so then we keep the current behavior, but we just change the name of the token. That's how my understanding of this suggestion. So I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Krister. Definitely appreciate your perspective. So, and I feel like the only things that are required of this working group really are point 1 and then 2A, as I should have done the slide, but first bullet on 2. I think that within here on the Chrome team, we can figure out this transition independently of needing any input from the working group. So yes, I think that is really the key bits. There's one more point I want to get to, if we're all mostly agreed here. Okay, next slide. All right, so one final point that sort of came up during the discussion of all this is that there is no guidance from bundle. Well, there's no explicit guidance for the situation for where you get the bundle only attribute in an answer for an M-line that's not in a bundle group. The spec does say it's unspecified, but it may actually be worthwhile to specify this behavior because what may happen is if you send an offer with A equals bundle only to a non-bundle aware endpoint, it's possible that it could copy the attributes from the offer to the answer, but not copy the actual A equals bundle grouping mechanism. And so you might get an answer that doesn't have A equals group bundle saying it's going to bundle, but you still have this bundle only attribute in the answer. I think the simple thing would just be to say we should have text in bundle that says if this ever happens and you get bundle only in the M section that's not part of a bundle group, then you must ignore A equals bundle only. And while naturally we cannot specify what non-bundle implementations do, we can specify what bundle implementations do when they get this sort of SDP in their answer. Roman.
So just to add to this topic, the general offer answer doesn't specify what you're supposed to do with attributes when refusing an M-line. So traditionally, if you put to port 0 or based on the spec, you can literally put anything in the attributes in the answer. They are supposed to be ignored. And since we're changing how offer answer works with bundle, and we actually assign some meanings to the attributes which are present in the answer, even with port 0, we need to kind of put in this additional safeguard because that will potentially affect bundle implementations. Because again, there are some endpoints which just, as I mentioned, we just put port 0, copy the offer line and just put the port 0. On the previous slide, when we said that like how we implement answers, one additional benefit, it's shorter, and anything which makes the current SDP shorter, like essentially putting an answer with an actual port and without a bundle only, is again welcome, at least in my book, because it's already way too long and it's it makes it harder to process. One last thing, like with this whole discussion, there are a number of SDP parsers that I've seen, which actually what they do is when they see the SDP with port 0, they stop parsing this M line. They just assume that this whole M line can be ignored, and it might be more effort to actually implement handling of port 0 then it seems it might require like some additional pre-processing of SDP, not just using the normal SDP parser, because SDP parser, because it's based on the older offer answer implementation, just ignores everything which is in the M-line 0. So there is no easy way from an app to look that the attribute was present there. So that's all I had.
So, Roman, does that affect what you would recommend?
No, it's it doesn't affect what we recommend for answers, and I'm still thinking there should be a behavior, and this is actually kind of a different point I wanted to bring in. With bundle and with Rtcweb, I never seen a use case. Like I see a use case of kind of not allocating candidates that you do not need when you're generating an offer, but I've never seen a use case where you actually want to actively refuse the M line or make sure that an M line will be refused if bundle is not supported by the remote site. Like I've never seen that requirement being there. So one possible behavior, especially with Trickle, is put port 9, put ICE candidates in the line, and only start allocating local candidates if you get the either the connectivity check from the remote site, or even if you get an answer and you see that the this line is not bundled, and that way you can so you can basically achieve kind of the same benefit without doing bundle only, by just delaying the allocation for the second M lines, or for the M lines that you want potentially want bundled, and that will work in 99.999% of the use cases, get the same result, and will not disrupt any of the existing applications.
Okay. I mean, I think we'll probably want to discuss the details of that on the list, but as we try to figure out exactly what text to be changed in JSEP for, handling of that point 2 from the recommendation slide, we can consider that.
And for the handling of this point 2, I would still prefer the max bundle to be specified versus just leaving it as application specific, because if we're leaving it for the future and potentially fixing this issue with no ICE credentials in that offer, because that might be like this again. I prefer not to generate anything which looks broken or can cause an additional disruptions which for no specific reason. And again, adding ICE candidates might fix that quite easily, even for existing apps, without disrupting.
Krister.
Yeah. My comment was to this suggestion here on the slightly off topic. I mean, in general, I think if you have endpoints that are simply copy pasting, attributes and whatever into answers, there are so many things, not related to bundle that could go wrong. But having said that, if we're going to update a bundle anyway now due to the misalignment with JSEP, I'm fine to add some text also regarding this attribute that it must be discarded if it's outside a bundle group. So I can do that.
Okay, and that was my thinking too.
Just comment on this particular slide. This looks fine. I have no problem with that. I think at some level the alternative with this should be treated as invalid SDP, right? Because what you want to do when you get those endpoints is have things fail quickly, because obviously what's happening is not valid at this point. So I'd prefer an SDP error, but whatever. I'm perfectly happy with this. Either way is fine with me. That's.
Okay, I mean, I think that we will need to come down on one side or the other of like, if we're updating bundle, should we just ignore those things, or should we generate an error? And if you think that generating an error is something that should be entertained, that's probably something that we want to have that discussion on the list.
I think it's worth commenting on what happens in this use case, and there's two possible things, like just ignore it and carry on, do your best to carry on to make it work, which is effectively the proposal here. Or there's the, this is an error, raise an error early, and it's it doesn't, yeah, let's discuss on the list which one wants. I don't, either would be fine with me, but I think it's going to be that usual. What do you do when you're dealing with something that clearly is doing something that's wrong? And as Krister said, if they're doing this, it's going to break lots of other things. It'll be much harder to detect.
I mean, right. We allow both things. We can say, discard it and move on, or just, raise an error and do something about it. I think I think that's kind of generic SDP behavior. I mean, some endpoints they just discard things, and other may, release the session and things like that. So I'm fine allowing both. I think the key issue is that we want to make sure that the documents does indicate that this is an error case and something needs to be done.
Right, and I think just to be clear, in this case, the remote endpoint thought that it was rejecting the M section, but due to the fact that it blindly copied the attributes, it happened to include A equals bundle only. And that's what caused the confusion, that even though it thought it was rejecting the M section, now the person receiving the answer is going to think that it wants to use this M section. And the right thing, I think, to do for the specification would just be to say, no, the intent here was to reject the M section, and we should just ignore that A equals bundle only attribute.
And just to add to this is that none of the specification pre-bundle make this an error. So we just retroactively telling that the endpoints which do not implement bundle are doing something which is an incorrect SDP, even though it hasn't been an incorrect SDP up until bundle was created. So it's kind of we're affecting legacy stuff with a new spec and outflowing behavior which was perfectly legal up until this point. So that's why I don't think that should be treated as an error case.
I think, as is mentioned here, we do have this unspecified text, which we also use in other specification. But I mean, I won't argue. I mean, I'm okay adding more explicit text. But just to let you know, normally this unspecified, it was, I believe we have said in other specification also. But sure, we can be more specific and also remember that in future when we do new SDP attributes or whatever. Sorry for jumping the line.
I just want to respond, Ron. I don't think what you said is quite right. I mean, an there are SBCs that do this. I've seen it happen. I agree, right? But an SBC that copies attributes into an answer that claim it supports stuff that the SBC does not support is forbidden by the SDP spec. By the base SDP spec. So this has always been disallowed. It's not we're changing behavior here. You know, if you don't support bundle, you can't put in the attributes that say I support bundle. That's just part of SDP. So
again, we can argue this a little bit more on the list, but it's essentially the text for refusing an M line is a bit confusing, because it says you're supposed to put port 0, but it doesn't actually say what you are doing with, and that this M line will be ignored. Because by definition, by including an M line with 0, you're including something which you do not support. Meaning, like, for instance, you can have the proto line, which you have no idea how to handle, and you have no idea how to handle anything which goes into the format on that line. So you're already including something which you don't know how to handle, and you put port 0 as an indication of that. That's like that's kind of why where this behavior is coming from. And in some cases, endpoints refuse to parse the M line if it's not valid for the proto which was offered, even though the port is 0. And then you need to have a safe way to generate something which is safe looking in the answer while refusing the M line. That's where this behavior comes from, and that's why I was kind of that's why some of the SBCs are doing this versus just keeping a single M line with no attributes at all.
So I don't see anybody else in queue. So perhaps we want to go back to the previous question a bit and just use the handy dandy hand tool just to make sure that we have the broadest possible agreement on the way forward. So can I ask you to move back a couple of slides there to the conclusions you drew, Justin? Sorry, Sean.
Sure, sounds good. I think it's the previous slide there.
Okay, so let's see if we can run a quick survey.
Justin, can I just ask a question for clarification? This one first question, the second bullet, document that a bundle answer should be accepted but not generated. Does this also apply to subsequent offers and answers where it's currently used? Yeah, we say, you know, accept it for backward compatibility, but don't generate it. Or is there a reason why you only talk about answers?
No, I mean, I'm really, you know, referring to the general case of if you see that, you know, SDP construct, you know, you should it would make sense to be able to just tolerate it regardless of where it's seen.
So the hand tool is live. So far, there have only been 4 hands raised or explicitly not raised. So if you have an opinion on this, please do use the tool. Okay, the numbers seem to have stabilized at 12 raise hand and 0 do not raise hand. The other participants are still welcome to add their voice, but it does not look like anybody so far, at least, has objected to the way forward being updating bundle to use the JSEP behavior. So we will confirm that on the list, but I think from the point of view of the today's meeting, we can call that the conclusion of the discussion at the meeting in any case. As chairs then, our next question is, who's going to write up the update to bundle? So now we are looking for volunteers to make this proposal into Internet Draft, and Eric Riscorla has joined the queue.
Well, I wasn't joining the volunteer, but are we gonna you can ask the second question too.
You would like me to ask if, so there isn't an exact obverse of this of.
No, I'm sorry, are you gonna ask about max bundle safe or whatever?
Certainly, I'll be happy to do that, but I think that this, sure, let's do that and then we'll, so update JSEP to include an alternative name for the existing behavior, e.g. max bundle safe. Does that sound like a reasonable way to cast the question, Ecker?
So I think there's I don't know if we need to get into these details. I think that's a decent way to frame the question. I think there's one question or sub question there of, do we document the existing max bundle or do we just rename the existing max bundle?
So there are several people who have joined the queue on that, so I will wait to put the question to the group until they've spoken. Krister, you're first.
Sorry, I was just going to volunteer for the bundle update, so I'll do that later, or you can write it down also.
Eric, as the next participant in the queue and our note taker, please note that there was a volunteer to update bundle.
It is decided. Yeah, so I think I liked the resolution you posed, Justin, which is that we document max bundle safe, which behaves as max bundle does now, and then basically say some weasel words about how max bundle is like has a defined behavior. And I think that actually matches the style of these specs in a number of places where we just like openly admitted that like things were not as like consistent with like CF DTLS 1.0.
Okay, so we would not document, the existing max bundle behavior then is your recommendation.
I think you'd say some implementations do max bundle safe and some implementations do some other thing, which I'm happy to write down. Have us write down. But like say it's I'm trying to distinguish between document and specify, right? I think we wouldn't specify, but we would document, right?
Well, right, but like, are we saying that max bundle safe may have slightly different behavior? Are we saying that some implementations may implement other policies that have different names that are not documented here? I'm not totally clear on what you're saying should happen.
Sorry, right. So what I propose we do is take all the text in the specification now and replace max bundle with max bundle safe, and then put a note somewhere that says this is max bundle safe with previously named max bundle, and some implementations treat them the same, and some implementations do some other stuff.
Okay. So basically, saying that there is this other thing called Max Bundle, and like you're on your own, if you use that.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, I can look at that.
Lynn?
I think I'm sort of plus oneing is roughly what Ecker is saying here, but just slight variant of it. I mean, the reason I don't want to get into a whole bunch of work of specifying what the existing Max bundle is because, well, first of all, there's two differing implementations of it, right? So I think we should just say, everywhere in our specs we say Max bundle, the new Max bundle or whatever the new label is, and then somewhere we say there was a pre-standard label called Max Bundle, which has unspecified behavior and is not recommended for usage going forward or something like that, right? I mean, we have to reserve that label Max Bundle in the IANA registry. And I think we should just comment on the draft that it's a pre-standard, it was a pre-standard implementation with unspecified behavior. That's it. And that reserves the code point for everyone to keep implementing it however they do.
Okay, I've started a show of hands session, which I believe captures that. So 12 people have participated so far. If you are a participant and you have not participated, please do so as soon as you can. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the session because we seem to have reached the same numbers as before. Once again, we have 14 who have raised their hand in support and none who have not raised their hand out of the total participants for this session of 40. So I think while we will, of course, confirm this on the list, at least the sense of the room appears to be in favor of both these recommendations. The first, that we update the bundle spec to use JSEP behavior, and the second, that we change the name of Max Bundle. Your Bike Shed Paint, welcome here. Sent it to Krista as our volunteer for what to name this. I'm going to plump for Mox Bundle myself. But the next question, I think, going back to the additional things that are desirable for changes to bundle, those are technically not within scope of this working group. So we will caucus with the area directors to work out whether that update will simply be processed in MMusic, whether some of the work will be done here in Rtcweb, or what. But that will take place offline.
Hey, Ted, I want to flag that we do need changes to JSEP because this second change requires a JSEP change. I suspect that collectively the three of the JSEP editors can manage that, but that will need a JSEP change.
A fair point. And so we definitely would not reclose the working group until we had determined what changes were needed to JSEP, and probably not until they were complete. But the bigger work on where does the bundle document go, I think does need a discussion with the area directors on exactly where they would like to see that, unless they would like to weigh in now.
I mean, I think it. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter from an author perspective. But since the RFC was done in MMusic, I think that would be the best place, because whatever the ADs decide, my suggestion would be to do it in MMusic, just for clarity. And also to make sure that we also need a volunteer for the JSEP update. I think I can do the bundle, but I think we should be someone else doing the JSEP update.
Murray?
Yeah.
I think we are chartered to coordinate with MMusic at least I think as long as we do that, then we're compliant with the charter, and I'm comfortable to do either thing.
Okay, we'll continue that discussion offline then. I think we're all pretty comfortable that the document will get reviewed in both of them before it went forward, and that's probably the critical thing. Exactly who holds the gavel and the pen is something we can still work out. Do you want to go to your last slide again there, Justin?
Sure. Just before we move on, just a process question. Is this going to then be like a spec that would basically just define these new policies as an update, or would we do this as like a BIS for JSON?
As a process question, it would be simpler to do as an update. If you wanted
Agreed.
to do a BIS, that would be a good bit more work, simply for the RFC editor group, if no one else. So my advice would be to do it as an update, and then as we move forward with the documents, if they go to a later stage of standardization, there could be a change there. Cullen?
I mean, I might 100% agree with what you just said, but given we have the current XML v3, like if we took the RFC editor XML as it exists and we just did it on that and the ISG process approval, it sure would be nicer for implementers to have it as the real spec instead of everybody reading a spec that's labeled the WebRTC JSON, which actually like the key label throughout it is wrong. Right? I mean, like, why don't we just like fix it right? It's just, I don't understand why it's actually, or let me put it this way, all the reasons why it would be more work to approve the patch than approve the actual document through a diff chain just seem like problems with the IETF and not really very real, and it would be better for implementers to actually have the real talk. Like, it seems like, why don't we do the right thing on this one? I know this is up to the ADs anyway.
Yeah, and I don't have a preference between those two. We have no problem evaluating a diff between two documents. The tooling makes that very easy. So I support either way.
Eric, you're in queue.
Yeah, I agree with Cullen. I mean, had we if we didn't have like these processes, we clearly would just run the document in place. And so as Cullen says, let's for once do the right thing. And we have all the XML. I mean, like, if we just discovered this, if things have been done in the opposite order, we would have read the XML in place. We have the XML to do it with.
I agree. That was my preference too.
In the chat, I also see Magnus saying do a full update. I certainly have no objection if that's the will of the community, but I will say that I think that when you sent it out for last call, really being careful in the write-ups to make sure that the community as a whole understands exactly why it's being revved in place and how small the update is intended to be is going to be a challenge for whoever writes that. Sean, could you move to the last slide here? So I think this, the discussion here didn't strike me as nearly as complete as the discussion on what to do about the M-line question. So I suggest that this go back to the mailing list, and I'm going to suggest it starts on the music mailing list in particular to discuss whether or not this would be an appropriate piece to a later updated bundle, whether this update or another. Because I think this sounded like there was some discussion about whether this was simply wrong behavior and should not be called out in any more detail than that, or whether specifications of exactly what to do with that wrong behavior were appropriate. So I'm going to suggest that go to the list. I think that's it for this topic. Is there anything else people need to raise on either of these topics before we take up our AOB? Krister?
Just administrative. So if you're discussing with the ADs whether the JSEP update would be, taking the whole XML and just to do the fix and then republish everything, I guess we could consider the same thing then also for bundle. But have that discussion with the ADs and chairs and this.
Fair enough. Okay. Thanks, everybody. This is the major topic of the working group and dispatched with great alacrity. Much appreciated. I believe we do have one additional topic that was raised by Harold. Harold, do you want to present now?
Sure, I can do that. So this was just in order to get since the right people were here, really. So some of you have heard about NAT slipstream and why it can be a problem. Let me see. Let's have a look. Here I am. So when I first saw NAT slipstream, I was a little bit impressed because it worked. It's the kind of thing that, ouch, I didn't think of that. Okay, you have an attacker. The attacker has a web page. The web page is loaded by the victim. That happens all the time. You can hardly avoid it. Now, the victim causes the attacker's web page causes the victim to do something towards the outside world. Important thing is that one, it's to a well-known port, and the network layer will send it as 2 packets. The first packet doesn't matter. The destination doesn't matter. But the second packet needs to be a valid packet for some protocol that a NAT box will react to. For instance, RTSP, FTP, H323, various other things, because all these have ALGs in the NAT that cause a pinhole to be opened, allowing incoming packets or connections from an exploiter outside the NAT to some target inside the NAT. And remember, the exploiter and the attacker are different, can be different. The target and the victim can be different. So the victim is opening a hole for anyone to connect through the NAT box that some people believe wrongly, but they do, is a firewall. So, next slide. The requirements for making this work is that the victim must generate a message that its network layer breaks into 2 packets or more, but 2 is a simple case. With UDP, it means generate a message that is larger than the MTU that the victim believes it has. With TCP, it turns out that there's a nice little option in TCP that allows the attacker, the target of the message, to actually send back, please break the packets up in these small chunks so it can control your packet breaks. The second condition is that the attacker must be able to exactly control the part of the message after the break. And of course, you must have a NAT box, and the NAT box must have an ALG for that port number, and treat the message as a valid request. Next slide. Well, we can try to defend against this. Not break up packets, like 1500 bytes forever. That's probably unrealistic when we're dealing with TCP, but only some of the time it's a problem with UDP. Intrusion detection systems might want to look carefully at TCP MSS so that if it gets an MSS like 32 bytes, it kind of goes, that's something wrong here. The other defense is that we need to not allow the attacker control over the packet content. The most famous example used a turn username of 1,000 bytes. So that was easily accessible, and for once it was actually not allowed in the spec, so we put in a guard against that. And of course, we can simply not allow connections to vulnerable port numbers. And the port numbers seem to be all small, the one that we care about. But we do need to leave the universal tunnel ports of port 80, port 443 as available, because everything runs on port 443. And of course, we could believe that NATs will be upgraded to not have this functionality, or at least not have it on by default. Sigh. What happened? Sorry. Okay, that's the lightning talk about what NAT slipstream is and how it works and how we can defend against it. Next slide. So the reasons why it can be an RTC web matter is basically because RFC 8826, the giant security consideration section that we otherwise would have to have in all the documents, outlines most of the threats that executing other people's code in the web page and letting that make connections exposes. But it does not mention the idea that you could use the attempt to set up a connection as an attack against the middle box. And being aware of the issue is the first line of defense. So possible actions we can take on this as RTC Web or as individual submission supported by the RTC Web mailing list or whatever. I'm not all that keen of trying to resurrect the group with yet another charter. So it's probably an INSAB action of some kind. We could do nothing. That's simple. We could write a short document describing these security considerations, saying that this updates 8826 to actually cover this thing. Might call some people's attention to the kind of problem. Or we could revise 8826 to include these considerations. So that's all I intended to say. So now let the working group speak.
Justin, you're first in queue.
Yeah, Harold, if you could go back to the first slide, I guess one question I have is how unique is this problem to WebRTC? Or is this WebRTC, a thing that uses some slightly different protocols and then needs like its own sort of analysis here because it's using its own protocols? Like in particular, how does turn, I forget the details, like how do the things you mentioned about turn username turn into this particular type of attack, and things that we should be conscious about and think about perhaps writing in this document?
So the reason why it turned out into turn username was that Sami was using turn username to make the packet so long it got broken in two. So it was, and I think he put the attack packet in the later part of the term username. So anything that makes the packets very long is a danger. And so when I put in the safeguards against overlong usernames, I also put the same safeguard in against passwords and a few other attributes. I don't know if we covered them all. The reason why it's unique to WebRTC is that WebRTC is the poster child for shipping executable content into other people's computers and telling them, oh, it's safe to execute this content. Well, the content can cause packets to be sent on the network. I mean, HTML or HTTP has the same problem in some ways, but HTTP runs on it's guarded against this particular kind of attack via this forbidden port lists is the most important one, and the fact that people are a little bit used to dealing with HTTP.
Refresh my memory, like it may just because it's 5:30 in the morning and I don't understand this exactly, but how does the block port list obviate this attack, especially in the WebRTC context?
The people who maintain the blocked port list are trying to make sure that every port that has an ALG inside a commonly used NAT box that can be abused for this is on the blocked port list.
I see. So you have
blocked ports.
I see. So the attacker would have to tell someone to go to a turn server that was at a port that was on a port where the NAT had an ALG.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Cullen, you're next.
Sorry, I missed the keyword there. So I mean, like I get what the heck. I get the issue. I mean, this has been discussed for a long time. Like writing, if somebody had the energy to write a little additional draft that described this, sure, don't really care. But like the NATs, this is actually really quite uncommon and very hard to get anything. It's not that there aren't ALGs. There's lots of ALGs in the NAT still, but ALGs which either defragment the packets, which make this hard to do, or they ignore commands that show up in second fragments if they don't defragment the packets that control the stuff. So, I mean, can this still happen? Yeah, of course, somebody can go find something from long ago where it happens, but it's less prevalent than you might think. And it's impossible to solve. Like there's the only way you can really solve or mitigate risks on this involve dramatically breaking your network. We're already, the IETF specifications already recommend these ALG, like if you write your NAT such that they follow the IETF specifications any way whatsoever, you're not going to have this problem. I mean, I think it's worth commenting on somewhere, but everybody always tries to blow this into a big deal. But when you go to actually survey the NATs that you can do this on, it's not that great of an attack. And it's certainly not an attack that's going to work on any enterprise corporate any enterprise firewall that's been updated in the last, years. So I just don't think we should be doing very much about this. I mean, documenting and explaining it, sure, but this is not a WebRTC problem. This is a very broad problem.
Well, what I gathered from Sami's original write-up and the amount of reaction it garnered was that pretty much all the cheap Linux-based default install Linux IP tables firewalls were vulnerable.
I would push back on that. I mean, my testing would suggest that's just wrong. So I noted in the write-ups of this, the write-ups usually go like this. There's a problem like this, and they describe, if you don't do fragmentation. And then they say, and all the cheap Linux-based things do something that's not exactly the same thing. Like they comment on one that lots of Linux things use IP tables, and then say if your IP tables was done wrong, you'd have this problem. It's like, well, go try it on one of those NATs and see what happens.
I haven't tried it myself. I have seen the write-ups.
Okay.
So checking the stats on this might be a good idea. I'll ask.
But either way, it doesn't change that it does happen. It is an attack, whatever. I mean, like writing it up is still a useful. Like if it happens on one NAT or a zillion NATs, it's still worth writing up, right? I mean, I can understand that, but the further making our stuff works, like if we then go and use that as a reaction reason to go and make our networks work less well by blocking more things and make people find more ways to work around all the blocks in the network and contributing to that whole space, I that's a lose, and we should, I would not want to see us go down that path. That's all I'm trying to say. That's it.
Okay, there are 4 more people in queue, but I'd like to cut the queue at very soon now. So if you're not in the queue and you feel like you have something desperately important to say, either get in there quickly or be prepared to send it to the list. Justin, you're next.
I was in queue before, but since I'm in queue, I'll just mention I think the block port list seems like that's doing a lot of like the work here in terms of keeping things safe. And the question is, can that block port list be applied to ICE candidates? So I think most of the attacks against Turn could probably also be carried out against ICE with like ICE usernames. And if the block port list is the thing that we're going to use to protect Turn, can we also use that for ICE, or is that going to cause connectivity problems? Okay, I see Harold replied in the chat.
I hope that. I think that we currently, the place I put in the use of the block port list, I think it covers all use of ports from WebRTC. But someone removed the log statement in there, so it will take a little bit of hacking to make sure.
Okay.
It's still showing Cullen in the queue, but I think Cullen, you're done, right? Erica's next. Yes, Erica's next.
So I think I'm treating this as like a dispatch question. So I suggest we dispatch this with draft would be welcome, and then maybe we could publish an individual submission. I don't think we should change the security considerations document for this, just for mechanical reasons. Like the things you're proposing for JSEP is like a bundle, like pretty trivial, but this will be like real effort and people have to review it. And like, so I think a new document would be a better thing.
Timothy?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of say that the reason it's kind of difficult for WebRTC is we're one of the few places where you can generate UDP, and this attack is significantly easier in UDP. So I think that's why it becomes a WebRTC problem. Or rather, generate it from HTML, JavaScript, HTML5. I think one of the things that we could maybe do is talk about randomized padding. So randomized padding, specifically ICE and Turn packets. So you add a piece of a data chunk in there that is of random length, and that would make the attack significantly less successful. I question whether, like Colin was saying, that there's a downside to doing this, and I think particularly in terms of the blocking the low number ports. Does anyone really want to run a Turn server on a port that's less than 1024? Like, does anyone actually do that? I can't see it, and I do think that it's a real problem because, and saying that it's not an enterprise problem isn't useful because we're all at home behind old routers. Like nobody's been able to replace the router for the last year at home, and they're all running whatever was there that we put in 5 years ago. And a lot of those are antiques, frankly, and definitely have really dodgy ALGs. So I think it is a real problem. I've got no statistics to prove that, but I really do think it's an issue. And I wonder if it would be possible to make it so that ice packets were only ever single. Like, is there any reason why you would want to fragment an ice packet? And that's my long and tedious contribution.
So thank you for that, Roman. We did actually cut the queue, so you can, thank you. I think my sense of it from this particular set of conversations is that many of the issues that are being raised with this extend considerably past Rtcweb, even if we might be the poster child for the problem. And the result of the problem, and the result of it means that any actions that might be taken to respond to it would have impacts not just to Rtcweb, but beyond it. So I think probably the best thing to do, as Eric hinted, was to treat this like a dispatch problem and try and find the right home for this work. So I suggest that the chairs work with Harold and the ADs to figure out if he is willing to write such a short RFC, where the best place to evaluate it would be. I suspect it would be SAG or someplace like that, but we can certainly have it reviewed inside Rtcweb as well. Is that an acceptable way forward?
Seems good to me.
Does anybody object? Okay, so the action item for the note taker is to the chairs and to Harold to work with the ADs to find an appropriate place for a short description of this attack, and for that place to be the place where mitigations are discussed. I think, Sean, are we at the end of our agenda? I think we may be.
Sorry, too many buttons, but yes, we are at the end of the agenda, and we will give you back 14 minutes of your life. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. And once again, really appreciate how fast the core issue has been resolved by the group. I look forward to confirming it on the list.
Ciao.
Ciao, everyone.
Thank you.